Gotten a bit crazy about the book because it's totally astounded me, and there was a lot to learn from. And thank you, Combe, for that exposition. We all know that star positions, celestial timings make a big difference, and they've guided rulers across cultures and civilizations and centuries, starting from Genghis Khan and the Mongol tradition of celestial omens. Now, while we're talking about the Timurid rulers and Mughals and how they not just venerated the sun, but use horoscopes and believe in this zijes, I think we should go back to how this evolved and where this came from. Now, this story, and many of you would know that, but it's worth repeating because it's really important that we know it well enough and make it a part of a public discourse. So it was in the 5th century, you all know that, Aryabhata did something spectacular, totally revolutionary. He took away the stars out of the myth and put them in the domain of science. He spoke about Earth's rotation, trigonometry, geometry, eclipses, planetary motions, and precise observation. Astronomy for him, obviously not as a prophecy, it was measurement. Now, this was the civilizational breakthrough that led to all that we are discussing now. Now, Aryabhata's genius was not in answers, but in method. And this method, this system, could be tested, corrected, verified, and transmitted. The method did not vanish with time. It traveled slowly, elliptically, just like planets do. Now, centuries later, Al-Biruni enters the picture, who actually accompanied Mahmud of Ghazni, but he came back and stayed here. Maybe he was just, wanted a ride. So I don't know whether to call him a student or a part of the conquering team. Now, he learned Sanskrit, he translated Aryabhatiya, and he read Indian texts in the original and acknowledged without hesitation the scientific superiority of Indian astronomy in several domains. Now, the other method was the Greek methods, Aristotle with the philosophical framework, and then, of course, Ptolemy. Now, Al-Biruni distinguished sharply between blind astrology and rigorous astronomy. He rejected superstition, but embraced calculation. Calendars, eclipses, geography, timekeeping, these were all sciences essential to civilization and governance, or administration, you'd call it. Now, let's look at the chain, this whole chain of this scholarly documentation. It's very interesting. While Aryabhata's mathematics found in Al-Biruni a very careful, respectful custodian. Now, let's go to 14th century, Ulugh Beg, from 11 to 14. Now, Ulugh Beg, the Timurid prince of Samarkand, he inherited Biruni's methods, studied it, elevated it to a scale. He built observatories. Imagine Samarkand at that century. Measured stellar positions with complete precision. And he compiled Zij, the star catalogue, and astronomical tables that actually became authoritative across Asia. Now, this was no way mysticism. This was sheer data. He transformed astronomy into a tool of administration. Time, seasons, revenue cycles, navigation, calendars, empire itself began to move to the rhythm of the skies. So now let's look at this. So Mughals followed Ulugh Beg's tradition, completing the cycle, Zij-based astronomy, solar calendars, and all that we mentioned. So Mughal practice indirectly rested on Aryabhata's mathematical astronomy. Now this forms a complete intellectual circle, scientific circle across the centuries. Empires, dynasties, civilizations. I went a bit crazy about the book because there was so much I was learning from it. And I think both sides of the spectrum have a lot to learn from. Now, first of all, about the book, it's beautiful, it's expansive, it deliberately wanders, and the wanderings make you seek more, and you also wander a bit and want to know more about the subject and the research. Full marks to MJ Saab for Jawarji for great research. Now the book is very poetically written. And you know, I'm a cinema film student. Now he paints history in this, technicolor, colorful brushstrokes, where you actually visualize Akbar at war, Jahangir ruminating. And we see these emperors not just as, as distant creatures, statues of sorts, but, as ordinary men, hopeful, anxious, worried, seeking. So there is a fugitive emperor. Think about this. Humayun, moving through dust and dread with literally no clothes, except for one set. And a frightened queen, who of course, whose labor pangs were disturbed by Maulana Chand. Who, you wonder, now that's another point, what would happen if Maulana Chand was not there? Can you imagine? Because he ensured that Akbar was born at a certain time. This was Akbar's horoscope. And it was Akbar at that expanded the dynasty, which continued for another 150 years. So imagine the role of Maulana Chand, who I learned about through the book. Now you see, Akbar is at war. He's not a name in a chapter, but is a figure in motion. Dust is rising. Things are being planned. And then Jahangir, almost modern in his self-awareness, in his ruminations. Then, Jahangir is almost like an emperor who watches himself and learns from what is happening around. So as Chaos After Me reminds us, Jahangir does not only inherit an empire, he inherits a contradiction and records it honestly. So, you hear history of empires through treaties, sword, ideologies even, let's be honest about it. But After Me, Chaos looks at all of us and asks all of us to look up instead. So when you look at the history of astronomy, you do realize that knowledge, like the planets, does not follow a linear path. It follows an elliptical path, and slowly, and it returns to centuries later to a point where it all began. So as the book informs us, that veneration of sun. Now, I'm a Muslim girl, woman, who grew up in Kanpur, to a Sunni Deobandi family. And for me to learn that Mughal rulers venerated the sun is completely, I feel not just astounded, but flabbergasted. Now you look at this, Humayun began Jharoka at sunrise. Akbar recited litanies to the sun, and Jahangir also followed it. Solar and lunar calendars and years were honored with weighing of all these kings against gold and silver. And note, when a daughter who was born apparently in Mula constellation in the house of Jahangir, Akbar got very worried. He called Abul al-Fazl and he says you have to counteract the curse because the ruling planet of Mula was Ketu, and it was presided over Nriti. Incidentally, when I joined Aam Aadmi Party and that, it was Ketu. So I learned a lot, but abhi to Mahadasha chal rahi hai. Shukr ki to main thodi shant hu. So, because, Ketu gives me the shivers. So the ruling planet of Mula was Ketu and presided over Nriti, the goddess of dissolution. A Jain monk was finally invited to perform, to undo the bad luck that could have caused this young girl who was born in the wrong time, or as perceived by them. Now, Babur wrote his memoirs as a man constantly on the move. Defeated more than victorious. We all are history students. Some of us are history students. Now, if you read, he was watching his kingdom slip away because he got defeated a few times. But if you read the Baburnaama, and I just learned more from the book and whatever I remember, for him the heavens were never distant. And he actually believed that legitimacy was cosmological. His gaze returned to the stars, not for any comfort, but for direction and for orientation. Now Humayun and I have something in common. And now many of you would think, wonder why I'm wearing green. Because I'm discussing Mughals? No. What is the day today? Mercury, Budh. So it continues, you see, it's continuum. So Humayun's life reads like tragedy. I think it was, whatever I remember in history books, he tumbled into life and tumbled out of it. I think, lane pool. Now, until astrology enters the frame, and you will not believe this, but I was visualizing this. In 1542, hunted, homeless, betrayed, he studied the horoscope of his infant son, Akbar, to be. And he actually, he employed Maulana Chand, and we heard the story, this great anecdote that made me wonder about what would happen if Maulana Chand wasn't there. Because not just a poor lady, his wife, what's her name? Hamida. Hamida had to, literally she was in throes of labor pains, but poor thing. She was literally traumatized by this, sort of scary face. And then at the right time, Maulana Chand ensured that Akbar was born according to what he wanted, the perfect horoscope. And as for Akbar, he didn't just consult astrologers, they institutionalized it. We heard about what he did with the precious and important office of Jyotik Rai, where Brahmins from Benares were brought in. And so these men were not brought in for flattery, but only for accuracy. Now, in 1586, when generals warned that marching into Kashmir through the mountains could destroy the army, Akbar listened carefully, and he listened, and he knew he listened instead to the sky, because he knew the stars were favorable. He marched and he won. For Akbar, astrology was not belief, it was governance, it was science, it was calculations. Now, Jahangir, one of my favorites. Jahangir's reign glittered with celestial glory, celestial imagery. Zodiac signs were stuck into coins. Comets and eclipses were recorded in Tazo-ke Jahangiri. He ruled as if kingship itself was a planetary rule. His authority part of the larger cosmic design and symmetry. Shah Jahan, born of conjunctions. He believed his destiny was written at birth under the rare conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, and we'll ask Sudhanshu ji more about it. He calls himself Kiran-e-Sani. Sahib-e-Kiran-e-Sani, the second lord of auspicious conjunctions, allying himself with Timur. His architecture mirrored this belief: symmetry, alignment, celestial order carved into stone. And you can see, when you see Taj Mahal, you can see it's less of a tomb, but how do I say it, more of a conversation or dialogue between the earth and the sky. Now, Mr. Aurangzeb. Now, was he into astrology? Because purinical, he might be, ascetic, he would be. Aurangzeb the austere. Mr. Austere, we should call him. Yet when the time came to be crowned, as mentioned by M.J. Akbarji, he actually totally believed in astrologers who chose the hour. And of course, he also told his son that every incident of his life was forecasted and foretold. So obviously the Mughals ruled it as a statecraft. Now, what I find very interesting, and I really must applaud M.J. Akbarji, that, drawing from primary sources, Babarnama, as he mentioned, Humayunama, Akbarnama, Tazo-ke Jahangiri, and all the imperial correspondence of life, the book reveals how deeply celestial science shaped Mughal rule. Now you see, above the dust of battlefields and the marble of palaces, the Mughal emperors never stopped consulting. This was a sky mapped by mathematics, interpreted by astrologers. And there was no whimsy in it. There was nothing whimsical about it. It was inheritance, and what was an inheritance of science? And it was faith in that science whose order was older than any throne. Now, for me personally, and my personal perspective, because I learned a lot, and I will use it a lot, and I will read more, and I believe in unifying communities, and I hate binaries. So somebody like me, this book has been a great almost a relief, you know. So it shatters many myths simultaneously. The myth that Muslim societies rejected astronomy. Islamic civilization had made a clear distinction between superstition and science. Al-Biruni, Ulugh Beg, rejected fortune telling but embraced calculation. The Mughals used Zij-based, again that star catalogue, that calendar, for eclipses, coronations, taxation, and travel. So Mughals and the astrology and even the way of governance was not based on any Sharia. It was based on scientific mathematical calculations. Then the myth that Hindu and Muslims' intellectual worlds were sealed off. They were silos. They were not. They shared the same language. This was a language of numbers. So science crossed religious boundaries with ease. Aryabhata's genius transcended religion and religious beliefs. Now, I learn a lot. What I learn is that we are haunted by binaries. I consider them false. Life cannot be that simplistic, and this is a great illustration of that. Now, there is one side which insists that Mughal rule was driven only by religion. And the other side is there. Now, the other side claims that astrology has no place in Islamic history. Both are wrong. And I mean, I can tell you about my family. To even go to an astrologer in my household was completely not just frowned upon, but forbidden. But I wish they knew more about the Mughal emperors. You know, I think Akbar would have been less strict. Now, many Mughals drank wine, as you all know, venerated the sun, and commissioned Brahmin scholars and ruled through science. Now, another false claim is that Mughals imposed an alien civilization. They absorbed it, they adapted it, and extended what already existed. Now, in today's political discord, one side still insists that Mughal rule was purely religious domination, alien to Indian soil. And in many ways it could be. I mean, you know. But the other insists that any discussion of astrology within Islamic history is heretical and embarrassing. So by showing how Aryabhata's methods travel into Mughal administration, the book reclaims science as a civilizational inheritance rather than a communal possession. Now, the sky above India did not change when dynasties changed. The planets did not recognize religion. Science thankfully remained and will continue to remain impervious to ideology. And it also reminds us that India's past was not governed by neat religious compartments, as many historians would have us believe, both sides of the spectrum, and you know what I'm talking about. That power, knowledge, and governance was negotiated through shared intellectual traditions. The emperors who prayed also calculated. Scholars also believed and measured. Mughals were neither saints nor villains. They were rulers embedded in a long scientific continuum. So now when our identities are quite hardened, I think the book and the history we learn from softens the edges, blurs them, even the boundaries. Not by denying any differences, but by illustrating, showing continuity and commonality. Now it shows that India's strength has always been absorption, not exclusion, in transmission, preservation, not in erasure. So for me, After Me, Chaos is just not a book about the Mughal past. It is a quiet intervention in the present, asking us to step back from, rage, outrage of a kind, look upwards and remember that we have always lived under the same sky. And coming back to my personal takeaway, there are times, and you know, I'm in politics and I've been activist, Anna, Nirbhaya, all those Andolans, when I feel despondent, wondering about what's going to happen, I come closer home to Ghalib. And you know what Ghalib said? रात दिन गर्दिश में है सात आसमां, हो रहेगा कुछ ना कुछ, घबराएं क्या?